Welcome back to the Heightened Report. Today we are doing episode 2 on the series Legends and Figures. So today we're going to talk about Samson, who was known as the strongest man of the Bible. He was also one of the 15 judges in the Bible. So I think let's start off. Klaus, can you give us some background on the book of Judges?
Yes, so Judges is to express the failure of the Israelites to keep their part of the covenant. God shows over and over his power to them, and the book shows that neither the people nor the leaders would remain faithful to the Lord. And yet God shows their mercy every single time. So the book focuses on the judges who were the deliverers and you can say in a certain sense the instruments, God's instruments of deliverance to provide deliverance. And they were probably, in today's terms, the leaders of Israel. So they weren't much different from kings and things like that. And Samson was one of these judges then. And what's interesting is that the book of Judges plays throughout a few years, but especially Samson's story is around 1000 to 1100 before Christ, which is pretty much in the Iron Age, we could say, of that time. And which already gives us an idea of a few other stories that might be of interest. Out of other,
Such as?
Like the story of Hercules and things like that. So it already gives us an idea of other mythical stories and things of that time.
All right.
But we'll get to that in a moment.
I think so, yes. Can you give me some background about specifically the time period that Samson lived in, where the Israelites were in that time?
Okay, so what happened before was obviously in the book of Joshua, where he led the Israelites into the promised land, into Canaan. And they started finding their own place to stay, and the land was divided into different areas and to different groups of people. And so there was a lot of mixture between cultures already and things like that. And we especially see in this part of Samson the influence of the Philistines, and God wanted them to stay away from the Philistines in a certain sense because of the influence their culture can have on the Israelites. It gives us an idea of what might have happened already. But what happens afterwards is then that they don't stay faithful to the word of God. They don't stay faithful to what God promises them, and eventually God puts them into exile. But this is like the first part of that story, and this is the start of them not being faithful after God has made the promise to Abraham of the promised land and everything.
I believe it's said that the Israelites were given to the Philistines. So I think the word used in most of the books of the Bible, most versions of the Bible, is they were given to them. So could it be like maybe they were something like slaves? They were suppressed by the Philistines.
In a certain sense, yes. This happens before the exile, I believe, that a lot of the Israelites were given as slaves, and God decided his influence would not be so big over them because they weren't loyal to him. And I think he decided that, well, if this is the way you treat me and this is the way you treat my word to you, then my influence will not be so big.
And so that's why we actually get to the story of Samson, because he was born from a miracle, basically.
Yes.
Because his mother was barren, she couldn't have children. And so Samson was born unto them, and he is supposed to lead his nation through this horrible time. And that's basically where we are right now.
Yes.
All right. So I think let's actually get into what Samson did. I have a list here of just a few of the things that he did. So he was leader of his people. of the Israelites in under the Philistines for around 20 years, around there. All right. And then he started doing something. So the first thing that he did to show his power, so he was supposed to be this very strong, powerful man. The first thing he did, he came on a road, came across a lion attacked him, and he tore the lion in two. And so later, when he came back on that road, he found the lion and he found a beehive inside of the lion with honey. And he took honey from that beehive and he ate it on the road back to his home.
Yeah.
And so already that's kind of big macho thing to do, I think, just imagining that he coming across this lion, meats lying everywhere, and
obviously
just grabbing the honey.
Focus on this manly man.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty cool. About a very storytelling way to tell this thing. All right, so then later at a festival, this is either when he got married or after he got married. It's not all that clear.
When he got married at the festival of his
marriage. There were 30 companions sent to him, Philistines, basically just people that were there at the festival, and he gave them a riddle. It's not all that important, but the riddle comes down to him killing the lion and eating the honey. That's all of it. But he said that, all right, if you can answer this riddle, I'll give you 30 pieces of clothes, all of that. And so in the end, the men actually convinced his wife at the time to go to him and find out what the riddle is. She told them, they answered it. He got mad and he went down into a town and he killed 30 men, 30 Philistines.
Probably Philistines.
Yeah. It doesn't specify, but it's probably Philistines. And he killed them for their clothes and he gave it to these 30 men, companions that were at the festival. So just quickly that, and then later when basically his wife was given to another man by her father. Yeah. I believe that's the story. And he got very angry and he bound 300 foxes together by their tails. So not all 300 to one point, but obviously different foxes to different. And then he bound torches, lit torches, fire torches to their tails and sent them into fields, orchards, obviously of the Philistines. And he burned down a lot of their fields.
Yeah, I think... already some of these stories sound a bit strange.
We are getting to it.
We're already getting the idea that he was a guy that took riddles very seriously, and he had obviously had anger issues. Something like foxes. Foxes are a lone animal. They don't travel in packs. Perhaps rather something like jackals makes more sense. They are more pack animals, and I can't imagine how he tied their tails together, perhaps like with a rope with torches on them. But you can imagine even a jackal or a fox or whatever it may be, if a torch or fire is behind them, they would try to run away from it. So it sort of makes sense. 300 foxes, I can't imagine that you could collect 300 foxes, but perhaps 300 jackals, I'm not sure.
Either that, how do you catch 300 of anything? How long should it have taken?
I don't think he was alone in this, and even if he was, it would have taken very long.
But the thing is, with a lot of his stories, it sounds too big. It sounds half legendized, mythologized. Turn into like a mythical story made big. So 300 foxes might just be he had a few foxes, a few jackals or whatever.
Let them go into the fields and the farm and the vineyards and the olive yards and whatever it may have been, and they wreaked chaos. So whatever it may have been, he wreaked chaos.
Yeah, the result is the same. So let's just go on. There's just a bunch of things we can talk about, all of them, but the importance is what all of this meant. So I'm just quickly going to go on. Later, he went... 3,000 of his own men, of Israelites, came because they were mad. The Philistines came to them and they weren't happy with all this that happened, that he destroyed the fields and so. And so the Israelites said they're not going to kill him or attack him or so, but they're going to bind him and take him to the Philistines. They gave him to the Philistines. And when Samson was there, he broke free because he was so very strong.
They said the ropes turned like to ashes. Like
basically, yes. It was like they were so soft, basically. And it said he killed when he was there between the Philistines, he killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass.
Yeah,
So let's quickly talk about that one.
So I think it was perhaps like me just telling you I've waited 1,000 hours for you when you're very frustrated with the situation, or when you're trying to make yourself look very good. You say, I fought 1,000 men. And I think rather than actually killing 1,000 men with a jawbone of an ass, which sounds crazy because it probably would have broken a few times in that time.
I mean, how many people can you kill with just a bone? 10,
Yeah.
20 maybe?
So I doubt it was exactly 1,000 men, but a few men. You can probably say 100 or a few more that he killed, and it seemed like this strong man is killing 1,000 of the Philistines.
Just went on a rampage, and yeah, it felt
killing
like
a
that.
lot of men.
And
yeah.
obviously, as the story was told and retold, it grew, it grew, it grew. With all of his stories, it sounds like a little bit of extra was added.
It's supposed to be a lot of men, not specifically 1,000, but a lot of men he killed. I think that would be perhaps a bit more accurate.
And a little bit later, a lot happened, but the important thing is he was captured again, and he was taken to the temple in Dagon, and he was bound to pillars.
Yeah,
This
is the interesting story about Delilah, also a Philistine girl who cut his hair off and all of this. So that...
I think we can get into the betrayals and all of that after this. It's an interesting thing to talk about. But just basically the things that he did, the acts that he did. So he regained his strength, and he tore apart the pillars inside the temple. And that's basically where the story goes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He killed himself, and he killed 300 men, which they say is more than he killed before his time. So that 1,000 men... Yeah. Already giving an idea, perhaps 100 or 200, because if he killed 300 and it's been more than he killed before, say in his whole lifetime he killed 600 Philistines, it was quite a lot.
Yes, it should be around anything under 600, because it can't be more than this 300. So it's 300 plus anything under 300. So yeah, I think that's about accurate to say that, which is a lot of people. 300 people alone are a lot of people for one person to kill. So I actually want to ask about how serious should we take all of these stories? It's a lot of big things. It sounds like someone's imagination ran away with them.
Yeah, the problem is we're already getting a lot of parables and things with other characters as well.
Like you said, around that time, other mythological.
Yes, and it's not... I don't think it's just a coincidence that in that time there was a lot of other strong men, exceptional strong men with other names that had similar characteristics and similar traits and did similar things even. So I think it asks the question around the validity of it, and asks us whether it is important and what is important of the story for us to know. Does it fit within the rest of the judges? I think the other judges also, we get a lot of other mythical stories written to it. You think about Gideon, which went with 300 men and slayed thousands of men. It already gives the idea around the Greek mythologies of that as well. So it does ask the question. And the first one that comes to mind is in the Greek mythology, Heracles, which was a strong man. Also later in the Roman, today we talk about Hercules, which we also get a lot of parables and things, same things they did, both being strong and courageous men with a sexual prowess and a lot of charisma. You can already get an idea of him, of Samson liking his women, especially the Philistine women. Although we specifically read that he didn't give into the Philistine gods or anything like that. But It gives an idea of that.
But also, he was betrayed by the woman in his life, and Hercules was also betrayed by a woman. There's a lot of similarities between the stories. And so the question becomes, actually, I want to ask you when, okay, so this was 1,100 years before Christ. When was the story of Hercules first?
So Heracles was the first story, I believe, would be around 1,200, 1,260.
So right around the same period.
Around the same period, but probably around 100 plus years before the story of Samson.
Well, the thing is, that's where it becomes a bit difficult, because we can say it's around this area that happened, around this time period. We can't say precise, this is when it happened in the Bible or in history. So maybe it was in the same time. Was it maybe the same person? Is there a possibility to that?
Was it the same person? It could be possible.
Stories of Samson maybe spread around the world and reach the Greeks, and they turned it into their own mythology, maybe?
Even other way around.
Could be.
Greek strong person that they wanted to scare other nations of, and they spread the word to other nations. It makes sense. All of these stories have something similar in mind, a strong man, and how many stories can you really tell about this exceptional strong man? And a story that we would tell to scare other nations would kind of make sense about this.
We have this mighty man.
We have this mighty man that can slay thousands of your men. So whether there was a very strong person, I hardly have any doubt about that. I don't see why not. Was his name specifically Heracles or Hercules or Samson? We wouldn't know. But I think it asks the question, then why?
Why? What specifically? Why was the story told?
Why was the story told? What is the point of all of this? Well,
I think we might actually get to that, but before, the question I think that comes in first, did Samson actually exist? We don't know if Heracles or Hercules existed. We don't know if Samson existed. The Bible says he did. Let's put aside all these great, amazing feats. Let's put aside he killed so many 100 men and he slayed a lion with his own hands. That put aside. Just a normal guy. Could Samson have lived in that time? Could he have existed? Could he have been maybe a powerful person in the sense of he had authority over his people? People looked up to him. Was he a leader of his people? Was he a judge of his people? Could someone like that have existed?
Yes, absolutely. I hardly have any doubt about that, because I don't have any reason not to believe it. I think stories and these mythical people or creatures or whatever, people tend to put more tales on it and more tales on it to make
as the stories retold over the years,
as they retell it, and
as you say, to make it look like this bigger than life figure, so that all the nations can be scared of them or look up to them.
Yes, because imagine you start telling about this. Say we are comparing them. We're telling the story about Samson who tore a lion apart. But we have Hercules. He tore a Nemean lion, which is a big mythical creature. He tore a Nemean lion apart. And
so kind of one-upping each other.
Yeah,
and then he killed 300 people to one-up Hercules again.
But Samson killed 1,000 people.
Yes. So I think there is a lot of mythology behind this. A lot of imagination puts tales.
Yeah, people putting things together and saying, but this one is so much bigger and so much stronger than your scary person.
But the core of it is this person probably did exist. He probably did a lot of great things, maybe not as big as the things that are said, but he did a lot of good things and he led his people.
And probably a lot of bad things as well, as we read in this story.
The more you get into these kinds of stories, you kind of realize that these big people that saved their people, that we should look up to, they're kind of horrible people when it comes down to it. But we can get into that. So I think actually, let's get to what was the message or the lesson you can learn from the story of Samson.
Yeah, when we read all of this and you start asking the question about the validity of it and whether he actually existed, and if he did exist, if he was the person that they say he was, um, it you have to ask the question, but why? And that's the question I already started asking a few moments ago, because why do we tell the story about Samson if he perhaps didn't even exist, or he was perhaps someone else who did a lot of good things and maybe a lot of bad things as well. Um, but it shows us that over all the stories and with all this evidence, perhaps the exact evidence doesn't matter as much, um, and perhaps Samson wasn't a good person, um, but the message is that God still used him.
So even
And
if you do something wrong in your life, there is a few stories actually in the Bible that gets to that point that even if you're bad, even if you're a sinner, God can use you, can work through you to achieve something big. I think that is a big thing for us to remember now in our lives.
yes, and at the end of the day, all of us, we are free to choose, but you're not free from the consequences of your choices.
Oh, that is such a good thing to say. That sounds
Yes.
so good.
And I think it's true for a lot of these figures in the Bible. And I think, especially with Samson, it gets to this climax that Samson did all of these great things in a certain sense, but all of these things that you think by yourself, why? He had so many anger issues and he had so many problems and he overreacted most of the times. He took things way too seriously, things like riddles, and he put himself in a situation where he went to a prostitute and he liked the Philistine woman that tried to go against God's will most of the time. Although he didn't give in to the Philistine gods, he's in a certain sense stayed loyal to God, but still did a lot of wrongs.
Well, that's still a very good thing to say because we are living in a world where you can say the world is basically one big nation of Philistines. If I'm drawing a parable between
Yeah.
the biblical story, there is a lot of bad things. We are surrounded by them. We know a lot of people that aren't very good people. So you should still, if you're surrounded between all these bad things, you should still be a God loving and God fearing person. That might be also a very good lesson to take away from this story.
Yes, yes. Despite of it all, yes, we have free will and we have these choices to make, and most of the times it's not big choices between black and white. There's a lot of grayish choices in between that you can make. So in the end, the free will and the choices we make are not even as big as the consequences we carry because of the choices we make.
All right, that sounds good. Let's just quickly, as a wrap up, can you give me a summation of the story of Samson, what it all meant, and what we should take away from it?
So at the end of the day, like I said, we carry the consequences of our choices, but we still need to remain faithful to God because God remains faithful throughout to us, and God's word is still important to get to the world. So we must try and be instruments always, even sometimes remind ourselves that if we make bad choices, that God will still use us to get to what He needs us to achieve. So our good choices and bad choices, God will get to the end where He needs to be, but we still need to carry those consequences.
Okay, so this was actually a very quick conversation we had. There is not all that much to say about Samson. It's basically 4 chapters in the book of Judges. And so you can go read it for yourself. It's a very interesting read. Keep in mind that there is a lot of external influences on the story. Time might have passed and tales might have been added on, like we said. There's a lot of mythology behind this, but the core of it is he existed. You might have done bad things in your life, but you can be better and you can do good for God. Just
And
keep
God,
believing in God.
God will and can probably still use you.
Yes, God has a plan for you. He had a plan for Samson from before he was born, and he carried out that plan. same as for any one of us. God does have a plan for each of us. It's not just something random happening in the world. And I think that'll be all for it. So if you guys have anything to add, anything you want to ask, go ahead, leave us a comment, send us a message, anything like that. You can contact us on Patreon or on YouTube in the comment section.
Facebook.
Anywhere you can find us, we'll link all of that. And thank you guys for watching. Hope you have an awesome day.